We are excited to be joined by Cody Goodwin, who covers the Alabama Crimson Tide for 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports. He's here to help us break down what to expect from the Tide heading into the 2025 season. Cody, welcome to the show.
Hey, appreciate you guys having me to discuss one of the more interesting college football programs, at least maybe nowadays under new head coach Kalen DeBoer. It's a very exciting, very intriguing team heading into 2025.
Yeah, I completely agree. Obviously a historic program, but a lot of it under Nick Saban. Like you said, you come to think of Nick Saban and what he built there with that program, or should I say what he kind of rebuilt with that program and took them to unprecedented heights. But now, year two, Kalen DeBoer, let's start there, since, like you said, it is kind of an interesting transition here, because I think after what many might consider a rocky 9-4 debut season, I heard Paul Feinbaum recently say Kalen DeBoer, quote, didn't know how to handle success. Do you agree with that take? And how do you see DeBoer kind of adjusting here in year two with the Crimson Tide?
I don't know if it was as much about handling success as much as it was more, the SEC is different, right? And you look at DeBoer's upbringing, right? He was a head coach at Sioux Falls, which is an NAIA program. He kind of navigated the lower ranks of college football as a coordinator, got his first head coaching job at Fresno State in the Mountain West, made the jump to Washington, which is in the Pac-12. And that's Power 5 football, or I guess now Power 4 football, RIP to the Pac-12. But the SEC is a little different, man. Like, it's week in and week out. That's the best of the best when it comes to college football. And I know Big Ten fans might think differently, but it's a little different having to get up every single week in the SEC. If you don't bring your best, or at the very least a B+ effort, there's a chance you could lose. And I think DeBoer found that out maybe the hard way. I think his staff, which has a lot of Power 4 experience, they learned that maybe the hard way a little bit. But I think it was more of a wake-up call for DeBoer, because I think at Washington and in the old Pac-12 and even at Fresno State, and especially when he was at Sioux Falls coaching in the NAIA, you had weeks where you didn't necessarily had to always prepare for your best. I'm not saying that that's what they did at Alabama, but like you've got to bring it every single week in the SEC. And so I think that was a lesson that he had to learn the hard way last season. I think it's a lesson that he's going to take to heart. The entire staff is going to take that to heart this upcoming season. So I'm really intrigued to see what DeBoer is able to do in year two. And that's just the top of it, right? I'm sure we'll get into it. The roster now is more or less mostly his. The staff, they made a couple of small tweaks after getting the initial staff in hand. Obviously, they made a really big tweak, bringing Ryan Grubb back at offensive coordinator. I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit as well. But I'm very, very intrigued to see how Kalen DeBoer handles year two in the SEC, because I think that first year, like, you're not ready for it until you actually jump into it. And so having that experience now, I think, is really going to set him up for what could be a pretty successful second season in Tuscaloosa.
Right. I can agree with that. And I think even if you look at, I believe you guys are third based on 24/7 in terms of the recruiting aspect of things. You're bringing in a great class. 26 is still out there and open. We know you don't have to wait until, people really decide, and then Alabama makes their move at the end. But coming in with a number 3 class, that sets up going into the future, because now this is really Kalen DeBoer's class that's coming in, that's going to be there for sophomores next season, and so on and so forth. But as we stand right now, how did you feel about how he utilized the transfer portal? Because it looked like there wasn't a lot on the offensive side. I think maybe about 3 transfers, if I'm not mistaken, at least 3 starting transfers, let me say it like that, on the offensive side, and then some more on the defensive side. How did you feel about what he brought in from the transfer portal versus the actual commits for 25?
Yeah, I think from the recruiting aspect of things, I think a lot of us were maybe curious, like, okay, can you continue to recruit? Can you recruit at a high enough level in the SEC to continue to maintain the standard that was set under Nick Saban, right? Like, that was, of all the great things that Nick Saban did while in Tuscaloosa, it was routinely having the number 1, number 2. Like, I don't know that his recruiting classes ever slipped to lower than number 5 over 17 seasons. Like, that was, Nick Saban always had a plethora of talent at his disposal, and that helped him win a lot of football games, right? Like, that's no secret when it comes to college football. Recruiting's the lifeblood of the thing. So one full cycle in, I think with Kalen DeBoer and Courtney Morgan at the general manager position, and then a lot of the assistants that they have on staff, I think they've done a really, really good job with the 2025 class. They're really kind of getting to work on the 2026 class, especially this month, right? We're recording this in late June. They've spent a lot of this month bringing in a lot of top flight recruits, a lot of top flight talented kids that they want to add to the 2026 class. So they've done really well on that end. But I think when it comes to the transfer portal, they've done well kind of using the transfer portal as you know, kind of quote unquote free agency to kind of fill some gaps here and there, right? They brought in Isaiah Horton, who's going to help fine tune the receiver room. They brought in a couple other small pieces here and there, like they brought in a couple of tight ends for depth because that was a position of worry through spring ball just because everybody was getting hurt. But I think when it comes to the transfer portal, I think the biggest win that Kalen DeBoer maybe secured was the fact that nobody left the roster in the spring transfer portal, right? Like, and that is in today's day and age. And there's a couple of different factors when it comes to the spring portal, right? Like in the spring portal, at least SEC players cannot transfer to other SEC teams, right? That's an intra-conference rule. So that maybe limits where those players on Alabama's roster would want to go. But the fact that they didn't lose anybody off the roster in the spring transfer portal window, I believe they're the only SEC program to not lose anybody in the spring portal window. That in itself is very, very impressive and speaks volumes, I think, to the culture and really the foundation of what he's trying to lay there in Tuscaloosa heading into his second season. Like that tells me that there's a lot of buy-in from the guys that are on the roster, whether they're his guys or even some guys that were holdovers from Saban's last couple of teams. I think that spoke volumes to me personally that, hey, this guy, whatever he's selling, the guys in the room are clearly buying in. And it's, you know, one of those other added factors that's going to make the second season so intriguing.
Yeah, especially because, like we said, the season didn't really go as well as they would have hoped. So you almost kind of expected some of these guys would be kind of looking to leave after not reaching the heights that they wanted. But that continuity, that buy-in, like you said, to this coach in this program, I think definitely says a lot. Now, Alex just kind of briefly mentioned it, but I want to jump to it here. Finishing with that number 3 ranked recruiting class, I think is definitely big time. And it, like you said, it carries over from what Nick Saban had been doing there. I think for me personally, it was one of the biggest question marks for DeBoer when he took over at Alabama. I knew he was a great X's and O's coach. I knew he was a guy who could really develop talent, but he hadn't really shown elite recruiting chops while at Washington. And I wondered, okay, taking this job at Alabama, there's a certain level of expectations here when it comes to recruiting. Will he be able to maintain that level? And I think this big time class right off the bat definitely shows that he's going to be able to do that at least early on. So tell us about this class here, because from what I'm seeing here on 24/7 Sports, bringing in 3 5-stars, 16 4-stars. This looks like a really talented group. Maybe tell us a little bit about this group. And out of this group, who do you think could make an impact right away?
Yeah, I think a lot of the 5-stars are probably where you start with, right? Keelon Russell, number 2 overall player in the country in this class, quarterback, the heir apparent to, you know, I guess realistically, he's in the mix to perhaps start even this year, or at least get some significant playing time this year, right? You don't bring in a guy like that, of that caliber, to sit the bench, right? Like, is there still a little bit of development? Yes, but these are the types of kids that you want to develop while they're playing the game, right? Because realistically, if you bring in a 5-star, you're really only looking at probably 3, maybe 4 years, if you're lucky, of that type of talent in your program, right? And I'm not sure that you want to waste it. Now, granted, there's another former 5-star quarterback on the roster, Ty Simpson. We'll see how that quarterback battle plays out in the fall. But Keelon Russell is absolutely the crown jewel of this recruiting class. 5-star guy out of Duncanville, Texas. The other 2 guys, and I'm personally really excited about both these guys, at least in terms of the 5-stars. Michael Carroll, number 12 overall prospect in the class. He's an offensive lineman, an interior offensive lineman who I think could potentially battle for playing time this upcoming season. Again, talking about a 5-star here. You don't bring a guy like that in to sit the bench. Even if Alabama likes the depth that they have at the interior of the offensive line, you give that kid every opportunity he can to maybe play and vie for some playing time, get some snaps in, even if it's in some, you know, just garbage time blowout victory, something like that. Like he's been described as a forklift in the middle. I personally would like a forklift on my offensive line, and if that's the guy that's going to do it, absolutely. And then the other 5-star in this class, Dijon Lee, a very lanky, rangy cornerback, 6'4", 200 pounds at cornerback. Like, and this is, you know, you hear that size and it's like, okay, eventually he's probably just going to pivot to safety. He's going to be more of that center fielder Cam Chancellor type. Like, no, this dude's a corner through and through, at least everything that we've heard through spring ball. And Alabama secondary is very, very deep this year. They returned both starters with Damani Jackson and Xavier Brown. They were able to bring in Cam Calhoun from Utah through the portal. He's going to be, I think, a guy that's going to play some snaps here and there. But Dijon Lee's a guy that we heard through spring ball he's going to find his way onto the field. He's very, very talented, natural athleticism. And also, like, when you've got a guy who is basically a monster in the secondary, like, you find a way to get a dude like that on the field, even if it's only limited snaps here and there. So I think those three guys, you start with the 3 5-stars. They're probably going to find playing time in some capacity this season, or at least that's the expectation. And then you look at some of the other guys in this class. Ivan Taylor, a safety from Florida. He's Ike Taylor's kid. He's been really, really impressive through spring ball. I imagine he'll probably play some snaps here and there. Chuck McDonald's another really talented cornerback in a very deep secondary room. Jackson Lloyd, who, a top 60 guy, overall recruit. I'm not sure that we'll see him a ton, but he's probably a future offensive tackle for Alabama. And then there's some other guys here. A.K. Deers in a deep running back room. When could he possibly make an impact? Justin Hill, an edge defender who could probably play outside linebacker or off-ball linebacker role for Alabama. He's a guy that looks the part. How quickly can he get up to speed and learn the defense so that maybe he can see the field maybe in pass rushing situations? And then another guy that I know they're really excited about, Marshall Pritchett, a tight end. I believe his dad played at Notre Dame. He picked the Tide over Notre Dame. He was impressive during spring ball, just a dude that really didn't drop hardly anything. He's got some natural route running ability, and Kalen DeBoer loves to maximize his tight ends in his offense. So could he be a guy that maybe potentially sneaks in there and plays some snaps on occasion, or slowly earns a little bit more of the snap share as the season goes along? He went down with an injury in spring ball, so we'll kind of have to monitor where he's at come fall camp. But that's another guy that I know that the staff is really, really excited about. So number 3 overall recruiting class. I know I just sat there and threw a lot of names at you, but I think a lot of these guys are going to contribute sooner rather than later. And even if it's only a little bit this season and a lot more in the couple of seasons ahead, I know DeBoer's really, really excited about this class.
The interesting thing, I know, like you said, you threw out a lot of names, but the thing that I noticed the most of was where these players came from. There's a lot of California players on that list, which from my perspective, being that we said RIP to the Pac-12, which means you had to take some of those players from Oregon. And because if they're on the West Coast, Oregon's really the only team out there that you're looking at. So he pulled those players from the West Coast to come south. Of course, you got some Florida, you got some Texas, and then obviously you get some Georgia once you get into the 4-stars. But the amount of California players that he was able to pull, to me, shows direct his impact as a recruiter, and then again recruiting against which more than likely would be Oregon, or rather the Ducks over there that he's taking players from that I'm sure they recruited as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of that goes back to the relationships that they first established. Really, I mean, you go all the way back to when DeBoer was at Fresno State. He was a coordinator under Jeff Tedford. He left for a year to go to Indiana, came back to Fresno as the head coach. So he already had those pre-existing relationships there. 2 years at Fresno, 2 years at Washington. He probably established a lot of these relationships during, the couple of years at Fresno and then the couple of years at Washington. And then he was able to bring those relationships with him to Tuscaloosa. And so, combination of him and Courtney Morgan, the general manager, just being able to cash in on those relationships and bring in a lot of talented guys to Tuscaloosa. It's pretty impressive that they've been able to kind of, go through California, some kids on the West Coast, handful of kids on the East Coast. And then obviously they've been able to recruit a handful of kids from the state of Alabama and throughout the South as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the quarterback room, and I definitely wanted to go there because Ryan Grubb had said recently Ty Simpson would be the starter if the season started today. But it sounds like this is more of an open competition than maybe people realize. Do you think that Simpson holds on to that job through fall camp, or do you think there's a realistic chance that a guy like Austin Mack, or who you mentioned, Keelon Russell, could close the gap here as we get closer to fall?
This could be one of those battles, man, that lingers probably into the season, right? Because we really haven't seen any of these guys play, right? Like, we're really high on Keelon Russell. He's the 5-star guy. He's the number 2 overall recruit in this previous class. He's the highest ranked recruit that Alabama has ever reeled in, and that's per the 24/7 Sports recruiting rankings. Like, that's impressive. Hasn't played a college snap yet, right? So, like, as impressive as this dude is, like, there's an I gotta see it aspect of his game, right? And I think that you can say that about basically everybody in Alabama's quarterback room. The other 2 guys, Austin Mack, who he reclassified to initially join DeBoer and Grubb at Washington. He followed DeBoer to Alabama. He was a backup last year. He's 6'5", 230, oozing with potential, has a really live arm, has really he only threw like 5 passes last year, right? So, like, we just haven't really gotten to see him. And then Ty Simpson's the most experienced, and he has thrown 50 passes over the course of 16 games over the last 3 seasons. Like, we just haven't seen a ton of these guys play. And so I agree. I think Ty Simpson is, just by virtue of his experience and by virtue of just kind of being the dude that's bided his time, he is kind of the in-house leader. I imagine he's going to maintain that position all the way through fall camp. But once, week 1 against Florida State in Tallahassee, right, at Doak Campbell, that's when the lights are going to be on. That's where we're going to get our first crack at, like, okay, how good are you really, Ty Simpson? You're going to be running with the ones. There's going to be another defense on the other side that's trying to take your head off. How good are you, right? And I imagine, my gut tells me that Ty Simpson will be QB1 all the way through, but it wouldn't surprise me to see them sprinkle a little bit of Keelon here and there, maybe a little bit of Austin Mack here and there, depending on, some lopsided victories early in the season, or, blowout win. They always have the FCS game late in the season. Could see a little bit of more Keelon there, but my gut says that Ty will probably hang on and be QB1 all the way through, just because the little bit that we've seen of him, we've been really impressed. And I do think his skill set, when paired with a DeBoer Grubb offense, I think it's just going to be a little bit more of a natural fit. Now, if he doesn't produce and he doesn't play well, you do have a 5-star sitting on the bench, and not just any 5-star, but a 5-star that Kalen DeBoer himself and Nick Sheridan, the quarterback's coach, recruited. We're pretty excited about this guy through the spring. I know that there's still a learning curve that he's going to have to go through. He's still got to learn a lot about the offense and also playing high-level D1 ball. Like, if Ty's not producing, it'd be pretty easy to kind of look over at the end of the bench and be like, all right, kid, like, get ready to roll, right? So it's really going to be interesting. I think it could be a battle that lingers into the season, but I do agree with Grubb that it makes sense that it's Ty Simpson's battle. It's his job to lose. And so it's a matter of him, basically saying, like, hey, this is mine. And I think it'll take a game or two maybe before he finally nails it down.
So let's talk about, I guess we could call him the phenom in Ryan Williams, and the expectation as, I guess he's 18 now, or maybe, yeah, he should be
turned 18 in February. No longer the 17-year-old phenom. Now he's, right, just every other college kid.
Yeah,
right?
He's every other college kid. The expectation, because, I guess, if he was probably 18 or 19, it probably wouldn't be looked at the way that it's looked at, but being 17 years old and doing a lot of what he did last year, and now coming in, what is the expectation? Because I've seen his name bantied around a little bit in terms of perhaps Heisman at some point in time in the next 2 years, with him playing, that he may reach those heights, hopefully, or at least be in the running. Like, how are you viewing Ryan Williams in his development? Because 17 years old, a lot of kids are still growing, but you're growing into your body. You put on more muscle. Is he coming back stronger? Is he coming back faster? Like, what can he add to his game?
I think there's still a lot that he can add to his game, because he was lightning in a bottle through the first half of last season, right? Like, 2 catches, 2 touchdowns against Western Kentucky. Obviously, he made the dynamic plays against Georgia. He had some strong moments against, he had some moments against Tennessee, he had some moments against Vanderbilt. But really, there was the second half of the season, he kind of sputtered a little bit, right? So, he had, 6 touchdown receptions through the first 5 games, and then I think only 2 the rest of the season. So, I don't think the last 4 or 5 games he cracked 60 receiving yards. So, like, there's still, I think, another level that he can take his game to. Part of that could be, hey, true freshman, 17 years old, hit a wall, defenses found a way to scheme around him. I think more realistically, or maybe a more honest way to talk about it, was that Alabama's offense kind of changed over the second half of the season, just with the way Jalen Milroe, between the ears, just something happened midway through the season where they kind of had to adjust a lot of things about the offense, which meant fewer opportunities for the receivers. So there's, a combination of things as to why he maybe struggled in the second half of the season, but I still do think that there's another level of his game that he can take it to. And, I talked earlier about, when it comes to Keelon Russell, like, bringing a 5-star guy like that, you probably only expect him to be in your program 3, maybe if you're lucky 4 years. We view Ryan Williams through the same lens, right? And his first season is now done, right? And so, the common comp that we've given him is Devonta Smith, right? Smitty, the actual Heisman winner, right? During the 2020 season, he was just absolutely sensational in Sark's offense that year. So I think Ryan Williams has that ceiling. I think maybe pump the brakes a little bit when it comes to, like, is this guy going to win the Heisman? But, like, he should absolutely be in the Biletnikoff conversation this upcoming season if he's as good as we believe he is. I think if he's able to take that second-year jump, you pair him with another offensive coordinator in Ryan Grubb, who a little bit more aggressive. You pair him now with a quarterback who a little bit more drop back pass than, a guy who's got a dual skill set like Jalen Milroe does. So that's going to impact certain plays, how they're called, game scripts, how they're able to manage the game a little bit. There's a lot of things that are working in Ryan Williams' favor, I think, this upcoming season that could lead to a breakout campaign. I'm not sure if it's Heisman worthy, But I think he should absolutely be in the Biletnikoff conversation.
Yeah, I want to follow up with the rest of this wide receiver room because Ryan Williams is the big name. I think we're all excited to kind of see him take that next step like you talked about. But this room's pretty loaded. So could you tell us about the rest of these guys and kind of what we can expect from this group as a whole?
Yeah, man, it's a pretty good looking room, right? You got Ryan Williams. We talked plenty about him. Jeremy Bernard is back. He's a guy that started at Michigan State, transferred back to Washington, where he was wide receiver 4 behind Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk. Like that really high-powered Washington offense. Jeremy was the 4th receiving option, or I guess maybe the 5th pass-catching option when you factor in tight end Jack Westover in that offense. So he understands this offense. He understands exactly what DeBoer is looking for. He followed DeBoer to Tuscaloosa, had a good season last year, was wide receiver 2 effectively, but he kind of came on strong later in the season when Ryan Williams maybe took a step back and struggled with a couple of things. I'm expecting a pretty big year out of him. He does so many little things well, man. Like Jeremy's a receiver. He can run any route. He hardly drops any pass that's thrown his direction. But also, like, this is the dude he's a nasty blocker on the edge. He's a football player. He's probably your favorite football player's favorite football player. Like, that's just when you watch him on film, there's so many things that he does well that he's gonna find a home at the next level, man. I love watching. There's a lot of times this past season where they would snap the ball and I would watch just to see what Jeremy would do. He just does so many little things well. And then another part of the receiving room, right? Isaiah Horton mentioned him, the Miami transfer. You know, this is a dude that it gives you a viable third option that Alabama maybe didn't have, or at least a reliable third option last season. So, okay, now you've got another big 3 receiving core in a Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Grubb offense. Where have we heard that before, right? I'm not saying it's going to be like what Washington was, but you can kind of see the pieces coming together and what they're trying to accomplish. And then honestly, wide receiver 4 out of this room, Rico Scott, a Pennsylvania guy who has really taken strides over the last year. He was able to take advantage of some playing time in the bowl game because some guys had already transferred out through the December window at that point in time. He has really come on strong in spring. This is a guy who may not get a ton of playing time, but if they ever run 4 receiver sets, I'd tell you what, keep an eye on Rico Scott, man. This is a dude that I think could make some noise and could really take some giant steps forward once, you know, we're assuming that after this season, Jeremy's going to probably head off to the NFL. This could be a potential big money-making year for Isaiah Horton. Next up might be Rico Scott with Ryan Williams. If you're looking way ahead at the 2026 season, we're pretty high on this guy. He's another big body receiver who can run all the routes. So there's a lot to like about Alabama's receiver.
So let's shift to the running back room. So Jam Miller expected to start at running back. How do you see the rotation really shaking out after him?
After Jam Miller, I'm personally really high on the guy who's going to start off the year at RB2, and that's Richard Young. So he's another dude that when he came in the class, like he was kind of, I don't want to say forgotten, but maybe not as highly touted as Justice Haynes, right? He was the guy that came in the same class as Caleb Downs, and he was kind of thought to be the next great Alabama running back. He had a lot of really, really strong moments this past season, but just having to, share the backfield with Jam Miller, the offense, the way that it ultimately, kind of ran through Jalen Milroe, right, which kind of took away opportunities, not only from the receivers, but also from the running backs as well. I think Haynes maybe got a little fed up with that. Also, money talks. He transferred. Now he's off to Michigan, where he's probably going to be, the featured back for them this upcoming season. Can't hate a guy for chasing other opportunities elsewhere. Totally get it. But Richard Young is a guy who's going to have the opportunity to maybe take some of those snaps that Haynes would have gotten this upcoming season. I'm really high on this guy. I think he's got some really good pop in him. He's not afraid to lower his shoulder and run through contact. So I'm excited to see what he's able to do with some of those running back 2 snaps. Perhaps maybe if he gets enough of them and he's able to produce, he could maybe challenge Jam Miller for running back 1. We'll see ultimately how that plays out over the course of the season. And then behind those guys, I'm really high on an upcoming sophomore, Daniel Hill. This dude's a load, 6'3", 242 pounds. He played tight end in high school, was always going to play running back at the next level. But like to have that athleticism in your tool bag, right? And now you're going to be RB3 in Alabama's offense, where they're probably going to throw the ball quite a bit more just with Grubb calling the plays now. He could be a guy that we see catching passes out of the backfield. He's also a guy like, hey, 3rd and 1, we got a tank in the backfield. We're just going to hand him off the ball and see if he can fall forward and pick up the first down. And perhaps he could do even more damage with that. So I know he was dealing with like a small stinger at the end of spring ball. So we'll see where his health's at coming into fall. But I know the coaching staff was really, really high on Daniel Hill. So I think if you were to kind of, do a depth chart at the running backs right now, you'd start with Jam, then Richard Young, then I think Daniel Hill probably at that RB3 spot. So how that ultimately, what the snap share looks like moving forward throughout the season, I think that remains to be seen, because I think we could see them juggle a little bit, but it's a good running back room. I think there's still something that this running back room needs to prove before it becomes a very good or even a great running back room. But I think the potential's there. There's talent in the room. It's another one of those, we got to see it.
Right. So, let's move to the defensive side, which is, I think, there's questions all over the team, right? But we kind of know the direction that the offense is going in. It's young. You have people coming in. You have a great class of people coming in. But then there's the defense, which is what I alluded to earlier in terms of the transfers. A lot of transfers coming over on that side. How is the defense looking, meshing with the transfers that are coming in, and then some second-year players as well?
Yeah, I think the defense has a chance to be pretty good this year, I think personally. So, I mean, it's not a fully put-together defense. There are some weaknesses. There are some lingering questions that we need to see answered, specifically when it comes to the pass rush, the health of the middle linebackers. Where are those guys at? Because I know that the two key returners coming back, Deontay Lawson and Justin Jefferson, have dealt with varying levels of injuries over the last couple years. But you mentioned some of the transfers. And so I think that's where they fit when it comes to the puzzle piece of this thing is going to be really intriguing. On the defensive line, they brought in Kelby Collins, who Alabama native, spent a couple of years at Florida, did really, really well as kind of that edge defender, that defensive end. And then his sophomore year, that Florida kind of played him more inside, and he just doesn't have the size to really hang there. So, okay, he transfers to Alabama. Is he going to play more of that defensive end? Or Kane Womack kind of alluded to, the defensive coordinator at Alabama, alluded to the fact that they might play Kelby at both spots. So, okay, in my head, I'm like, maybe put him on the outside and let's just see what he can do, right? So we'll see what that experiment looks like, but where he factors into Alabama's defensive line, it would be kind of interesting to see where that fits in. At middle linebacker, you mentioned another transfer, Nikhai Hill-Green from Colorado, all Big 12 performer. He transferred in before I think Alabama realized that Justin Jefferson could come back, and I think before they realized that Deontay Lawson was going to pass on the NFL draft and come back for one more year. So, okay, now they've got three really good middle linebackers, as opposed to having Nikhai Hill-Green and a couple of younger guys try to figure that position out through spring ball. So they're actually, I think, in a pretty good spot. They ended up losing a pretty key they lost a key player, Justin Okoronkwo, through the transfer portal. That's a player that a lot of us really, really liked. He looked like he could potentially be the future at middle linebacker for Alabama. He transferred to South Carolina because he's just like, well, why'd you bring in all these other guys? It was kind of one of those things where it's fortunate that you bring these experienced guys back, but then you lose a really talented youngster. And that's just kind of the name of the game in college football. So how Nikhai Hill-Green factors in, like, do you start with just Lawson and Jefferson because they know the system? Both of those guys were hurt during spring ball. So that opened up a lot of opportunity for Hill-Green. What is that going to look like week one of fall camp? What's that going to look like week one against Florida State? Be kind of interesting to monitor, where Lawson's recovery is at. I think that's probably the big question mark there and what that means for Hill-Green. And then in the secondary, they went and got Cam Calhoun from Utah, who you look at some of the advanced analytics, he was one of the better cornerbacks in the country last year. Well, okay, now you're coming into a room that is returning both starters at cornerback. And also they brought in a 5-star Dijon Lee. So where does that leave Cam Calhoun? We're not 100% sure. Maybe you shift him into the slot. Maybe he usurps one of the returning starters and he plays outside. Who knows? That's one of those, I guess you can call that a champagne problem, I suppose. And then on top of that, they have a really good pair of safeties in Bray Hubbard and Keon Sabb as well. So Alabama secondary, I think, has a chance to be very good, perhaps even elite or even special this upcoming season, just with the returning experience. They know what the system is like. These are a bunch of guys that have played really high-level ball and really high-level ball together. I think the secondary has a chance to be very, very good, but still a couple of question marks at the front of the defense, and we'll see if they can answer those questions early, but it's got a chance to be a pretty good unit this upcoming season, I think.
Yeah, and that's actually where I wanted to go next here. I wanted to stick with the defense because Alabama is ranked number 2 in PFF's preseason secondary rankings. They're ranked just behind Texas. Tell us maybe a little more in detail here why Alabama might just have the best defensive back unit in the country this year.
Yeah, it's a combination of experience, depth, and just overall talent, right? Because you look at the cornerback room, like you've got 2 returning starters who are both pretty good last year. Maybe not great, but both pretty good in Damani Jackson and Xavier Brown. Damani Jackson, former 5-star guy, started at USC, needed a change of scenery, so he transfers before Nick Saban retires. He stays through the coaching change, played some pretty good ball last year. His opposite, Xavier Brown, was a true freshman last season, and he was one of the better true cover corners as a true freshman in the SEC last season. So you anticipate that those 2 guys are only going to improve. Mentioned Cam Calhoun and Dijon Lee as kind of the backups there. So, your 2 starters are back, and your backups are one of the best cornerbacks in college football from a year ago and a 5-star guy who's probably a Monstar. So the depth is in a really good spot there. In the slot, this is kind of interesting. So they've got Deshaun Jones, who was a transfer from Wake Forest the year before that. But that slot position is kind of interesting because you can stay with Jones there, who's a steady veteran presence. He played pretty good ball near the end of the season last year. Or maybe you cycle in Calhoun into the slot just to get 3 corners on the field. Maybe you cycle in a third safety to have, 3 safeties on the field. There's a lot of, I think, mixed versatility that Kane Womack can play with to kind of mix and match his coverages based on personnel, based on who they're playing, based on just what kind of defense he wants to run. So that who plays in that slot position on any given play is going to be really interesting to monitor. And then I mentioned at safety, they got 2 returning guys in Bray Hubbard and Keon Sabb. Keon Sabb was the starter last year, broke his foot in October. Bray Hubbard takes over as the starter. And again, you go through the PFF numbers, they considered him one of the best safeties in college football last season. So now you've got these 2 guys who Keon Sabb, he had 2 picks in Alabama's first game. I think this is a dude that's got an All-American ceiling. He started on Michigan's national championship team in 2023. He started in that game on defense. So you pair those 2 guys together, that's a really good pairing. And then behind them, you've got Ivan Taylor, who's a true freshman that we mentioned. He's been very impressive. But then also you've got Zay Mincy, who is a former 5-star guy. He started at corner, but he's one of those like long and lanky players where he was kind of more of a natural fit at safety. He has since made that transition to safety, and he's a dang good ball player too. So the combination of experience, the combination of talent, the combination of depth, and just there's so many different things and so many different buttons that Kane Womack can push. And Mo Linguist, the defensive backs coach, has done a tremendous job just continuing to recruit that position and keeping that position room full of just dudes. Like they've got a chance to do some really special things this season.
Yeah, this team is absolutely loaded. And I think we're kind of painting a picture here, just going through this roster with you, going through all the talent they have is so many different position groups. So what would you say is the biggest unknown for this Alabama team heading into fall camp? Maybe the one thing that you think could define whether or not this team is back in the playoff or comes up short again.
Yeah, I can give you one for both offense and defense. One on offense is it's always comes back to quarterback, right? Because that's you can look at the skill position and be like, hey, the running backs are pretty good. The receivers have a chance to be great. The offensive line, the coaching staff really likes where they're at offensive line wise. That you got, a starting left tackle in Caden Proctor who could potentially be, the number 1 overall draft pick in the 2026 NFL draft next season. He's got the size, he's got the intangible, the skill talent has come over the last couple of seasons. They've got an All-American at center in Parker Brailsford. They've got really good options in the interior. Right tackle's a little bit of a question mark, but Wilkin Formby is a guy who he really only struggled in 1 game last year, and that's what a lot of people remember because in the spot duty that he was able to play throughout the rest of the season, played pretty good ball. So how does the whole thing come together? I'm pretty high on the offensive line. I don't know if they're going to win the Joe Moore Award this upcoming season, but I think they're going to be pretty good. And I also think just the play calling and, having more of a traditional drop back passer at quarterback, whether it's Ty Simpson, whether it's Austin Mack, whether it's Keelon Russell, I think it's just going to lend to the offensive line playing a little bit more, call it normally, I suppose. When you got a dude that can both run and pass in the backfield, it makes you think a lot. It changes the way you play down to down. And so, Jalen Milroe is one of the most fantastic athletes I've ever had the opportunity of watching. The offense ran through him for better or for worse. I'm not sure that it's necessarily going to do that, whether it's Ty Simpson, Keelon Russell, Austin Mack at quarterback. So the big question for Alabama is quarterback, and not only quarterback, but how well does that quarterback play? I don't know that they need a Heisman winner at quarterback this year to make the playoff or, perhaps truly contend for a national championship. But they do need a guy that can get the ball to the many skill guys that are on, elsewhere on the offense. They're going to need a dude that can, in maybe some of the bigger games, make a play or two. So can that quarterback provide that, right? Like think more Will Howard than maybe Lamar Jackson, I suppose. Like they don't need a rock star back there. They just need a guy who can run the offense and maybe make a big play or a big throw every now and again. So we'll see what happens. That's the big question mark on offense. On defense, it's the pass rush. Like they really haven't had a monster get in the backfield down after down since maybe Will Anderson. Dallas Turner was a fantastic player, but I think it was Nick Saban said during one of the NFL draft shows the year he got selected, a little bit more Donta Hightower than maybe Will Anderson, right? So he's more of a versatile defensive threat who can do a lot of different things, whereas like Will Anderson was a wrecking ball who could get to the quarterback no matter what. They haven't really had a dude like that since Will Anderson left. They've had good pass rushers, and I still think they're going to have good pass rushers this upcoming season. LT Overton at defensive end. Tim Keenan is a really strong inside presence, probably better against the run than he is maybe chasing down quarterbacks from that defensive tackle spot. James Smith is another defensive lineman who I think could have a really, really strong season. He's going to step into a starting role. And then those outside off-ball linebackers, Quay Rusaw, he's going to be into as a redshirt sophomore. I think he has the opportunity to maybe take it up a notch and become more of a complete off-ball linebacker. He's one of the most fantastic athletes on the roster. So, but yeah, it's can they get home? We know that they can get home. They had 200 pressures, I think, as a team last season. But can they convert that to sacks? They weren't able to do that a lot last season. They were able to affect the quarterback, but you got to finish the play and get the quarterback on the ground. If they can do that more this season, that's where I think the defense goes from being good or very good to even great, possibly elite this upcoming season.
So let's talk about the schedule. I don't want to pinhold you into asking you what you think the record will be, but I will ask, is your expectation to make the playoffs? So September 27th at Georgia, and this is me personally, October 25th at South Carolina, and then you follow that up with at home to LSU. Those three games, I know there's probably some other games, but those three games are the ones that stand out the most to me, specifically the back-to-back from South Carolina to LSU. And I think South Carolina with Lenore Sellers, he's coming into his own. That team has been very good. Obviously, LSU with Nussmeier and, a lot of those guys are seniors over there. Those three games, I think, will be pivotal, at least to me, as you go down into the stretch of where you may possibly especially when in October, November, when you get LSU and you get South Carolina. How do you see those three games looking? I know a lot rides on the quarterback. Like, don't get me wrong, I know, but I think, Georgia's possibly taking a step back in terms of where they are. I'm not too happy with what they are, but that's a whole other story. But South Carolina is on the rise. Like, there's something there. I don't know what it is, but there's something there. And then obviously LSU is just veterans more than anything.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with like, what are the big three games? And then I would even add like a fourth one. I think Auburn at Jordan-Hare Stadium at the end of the season. Like that's a scary one, man. There's some weird stuff that happens at Jordan-Hare every single year, right? So I think that's another one that maybe Alabama fans should keep an eye on. But in terms of like, is this team playoff worthy? I think the measurable games through that lens, absolutely at Georgia. I think at South Carolina I would call that a trap game. I'm kind of curious to see
right. Yeah.
what the rest of South Carolina looks like, right? Like Lenore Sellers is good. I'd like to see him iron out some of the inconsistencies that he had in his game before maybe I become a full believer. And honestly, I feel the same way about LSU. I know LSU's offense is going to be good. They're going to have receivers. I'm probably not the biggest believer in Garrett Nussmeier in the same way that a lot of other people are. I know he threw for 4,000 yards last season, like 29 touchdowns, but also 12 interceptions, right? And the one time I got to see him against Alabama, that's just, he almost put up a goose egg, right? Like it wasn't, I don't know. There's something about Garrett Nussmeier that I'm just not fully buying into yet. But I still think LSU is going to be a pretty formidable team. Their defense took steps forward last year under Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator who came over from Missouri. The offense is going to be able to move the ball because under Brian Kelly, the offense has always moved the ball. So I do agree that game is going to be really interesting. The benefit of that game, though, is one, it's at home. Two, it's after a bye week. So Alabama's going to have some time to fully prepare for that LSU team. And I think that LSU game is really going to set the stage for the final stretch of the season, right? Because they get LSU at home, Oklahoma at home. They finish with the FCS game against Eastern Illinois, and then they go to Auburn, which, if you're Alabama and you're 10-1 going into that Auburn game, you probably feel pretty good, right? I'm not saying you punt that game, but
right.
You probably feel pretty good when it comes to playoff positioning. But let's say you drop that South Carolina game, and then you're, 9-2 going to Auburn? 9-3 probably don't make the playoff, man. So all of a sudden there's a lot more pressure on you to go into Jordan-Hare and have to win a game to secure a playoff spot. No, I don't know, man. That could get a little weird and funny. So I think you nailed it with maybe those being the biggest games of intrigue. But, I tell you what, man, looking at that South Carolina game as a trap game, I'm very intrigued by the season opener against Florida State in Tallahassee, because I think that can be the tone setter for both squads, right? Because you think Florida State 2-10 last year after going 13-0, winning the ACC and getting snubbed out of the last 4-team playoff because Alabama beat Georgia and won the SEC, right? So ESPN and ABC is going to play up that storyline. There's going to be so many column inches spent on those two teams, and also what happened the year after that, right? Because Alabama, they snuck into the playoff in air quotes, weren't able to take advantage, right? They lost a thrilling game to Michigan, who ultimately went on and won the national championship. The next year, they both missed the playoffs, right? Florida State fell on their face, went 2-10. Alabama finished 9-4, and just it was not a good first season, right? Like that was their first 3-loss season, just regular season. I think only their second one in the last 18 years or something like that. Like it has been a really long time since Alabama has lost 3 regular season games, put it that way. So there's going to be a lot, so then you come into this season, Florida State has done a lot on the recruiting trail. They've done a lot in the transfer portal. Alabama's obviously got year 2 under Kalen DeBoer. We talked about that at length here. This win or this game, whoever wins, it could go a long ways in kind of defining, okay, like what are they really about this season, right? Like if Alabama goes into Tallahassee and takes care of business, it's like, okay, year 2 under DeBoer, that's usually when the magic happens. Let's see what the Crimson Tide can do the rest of the season. But if Florida State is able to sneak it out and win that game, I know Clemson's probably the heavy favorite to win the ACC, and they're being talked about as perhaps a national championship favorite this upcoming season. But I tell you what, man, Florida State can open the season knocking off Alabama at home. That could snowball into something really interesting when you look at, what the ACC is going to be about this season. So that game is so intriguing to me, that season opener, because it could be a tone setter for whichever team wins.
Well, guys, we've been excited to have Cody Goodwin on the show today. He covers the Alabama Crimson Tide for 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports. Be sure to check out his work there. Cody, great stuff, man. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
I appreciate you guys having me. Going to be a very, very interesting team to follow this upcoming season, that's for sure.